It's like we're all drowning in information, right? Headlines everywhere, opinions flying at you.
Yeah.
But actually getting a grip on what's truly important feels almost impossible.
Yeah. Like trying to grab smoke.
Yeah.
It really is what we face every single day. And that's exactly where a deep dive comes in.
That's right. We cut through all the noise to bring you what really matters. And today we're focusing on a couple of big developments that are really shaping things right now.
We've been poring over this discussion that highlights some fascinating but concerning stuff. The first being the whole situation with the Atlantic and a military raid email list.
Okay.
And the second, and this is equally significant, is all this friction we're seeing as judges start challenging President Trump's policies.
Yeah. And just to be clear, we're not just rehashing headlines here, are we? We're really getting into the core issues, the different perspectives,
Absolutely.
and what it all might mean for all of us. So should we dive right in then?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So, the Atlantic story. From what we've gathered, the Atlantic somehow got a hold of information about some planned military raids, and then a journalist from the Atlantic actually disclosed that he was on the email list for these plans. So instantly the question is,
yeah.
was that the right move strategically, ethically even?
It really does cut to the heart of this tension that's always there, doesn't it?
Right.
I mean, you could definitely argue that the journalist jumped the gun. Why not wait? Gather more substantial information, maybe uncover a bigger story before revealing your hand, so to speak. Wouldn't it have been smarter to observe and only report when the impact would be really huge?
Yeah, that's that classic dilemma for journalists, isn't it? That immediate story versus waiting for a potentially bigger one down the road.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. The disclosure came after the operation had already happened, so it's not like he was putting an active mission at risk or anything.
Right. That is a very important point. It kind of shifts the focus, doesn't it? Instead of like immediate operational security, now we're talking about this broader issue of how all this sensitive information gets handled. The discussion we've been looking at actually makes this comparison to things like Hillary Clinton's private email server, right? And all those classified documents that were found with Trump and Biden. And it's like, while each case is different, the real worry is always the same, that if this kind of information isn't locked down tight, national security could be damaged, our global standing could take a hit. Serious stuff.
And of course, then you have to consider how the government sees this whole thing. They're going to be seriously concerned about a journalist being on an email list, about military raids, right? Who else had access? Were the security protocols even working? All those questions are going to come up.
For sure. And what's really interesting here is that the source mentions some pretty high officials being in the loop on these communications. We're talking the head of the DNI, even the vice president. So that raises the stakes considerably. The more people involved, the bigger the chance of a leak, intentional or not. And the source also points out something else that's pretty interesting. They say the Atlantic is probably going to lose a lot of access to the White House and other insider sources going forward. Kind of highlights it's a tricky relationship, isn't it? The press and the government.
Yeah. It's adversarial, but they kind of need each other too.
Exactly.
So back to the journalist for a second. You have all these ethical questions, the timing of it all. But what would actually push him to just go public with the fact that he was on the list?
Well, one way to see it, and this is maybe giving him the benefit of the doubt, is that he was trying to do a public service, like by showing what could be seen as, I don't know, maybe a careless way of sharing sensitive information. He might have been hoping to force a review of those practices, maybe prevent something worse from happening in the future. Almost like a warning signal, right?
Okay, yeah, I can see that. But the source also kind of hints at a less flattering interpretation, shall we say. Like maybe the journalist was mostly driven by wanting to break the story.
Oh, yeah.
To get that immediate attention, even if the core of what he was revealing, just being on an email list after the fact, wasn't really that explosive.
Well, that's the world of news for you, right? That constant tension between informing the public and the pressure to be the first one with a scoop. And in this particular case, the source seems to think the journalist's desire for a headline might have won out over a more, thoughtful or ethical way of looking at the bigger picture. Makes you really think about how news gets made and how it gets out there, doesn't it?
It really does. So big takeaway from all this seems to be that it's this really intricate interplay between, ethics and journalism, the need for national security, and all the unpredictable fallout that can come from disclosing information, even when it's not exactly breaking news.
Right. It really underscores how much responsibility comes with handling sensitive information, especially in this day and age.
Yeah.
Everything's connected, right?
Absolutely. Okay, well, why don't we shift gears a bit and talk about our second big topic then? This trend we're seeing of judges challenging President Trump's policies.
Yeah. It's definitely become a major part of the current political narrative.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because on the one hand, you have a lot of people who see the judiciary doing what it's supposed to do, acting as a check on the executive branch, making sure the president's actions are legal. But then you have this whole other side that says, hang on, these judges are basically going against the will of the people who voted for the president and his agenda.
It's that classic debate about separation of powers, right? Really fundamental to how our government works. And the source uses a really interesting example to illustrate all of this. The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 and how it's being brought up in relation to deportations. Okay, first of all, 1798. That sounds like something out of a history book. What exactly is this Alien Enemies Act?
Well, it's exactly that, really. A law from way back then. Passed in the late 1700s when there was all this worry about potential conflict with France. Basically, it gives the president special powers to detain and deport non-citizens who are seen as a threat during times of war invasion. But here's the thing. This isn't just some ancient law that's been forgotten about. The source points out that it's actually been used at different points in American history. The War of 1812, World War I, World War II, all saw this law being invoked. So it's not just a historical footnote, which makes its current relevance even more interesting and controversial, of course.
So there's a historical precedent for using it, but the source also says there hasn't been a lot of deep legal analysis of how it's being used now. It's mostly just immediate political reactions.
Right. What we see happening is a judge issues a temporary injunction. That's basically a legal pause button, right?
Okay.
And in this case, it halts certain deportations because the argument is that the Alien Enemies Act isn't being used correctly. Then the source describes how President Trump seems to ignore this injunction.
And according to the source, the public reaction was really telling. Apparently, a lot of people were on the president's side, even though there was a court ruling. Makes you wonder about how well people understand the whole concept of the rule of law, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's crucial to understand what a temporary injunction actually is. It's not a final judgment, but it's a way for a judge to hit pause if they think a law is being misused or if serious damage could happen before the court can fully examine everything. It's a temporary but binding order.
Gotcha. But the source also highlights a potential problem with these kinds of confrontations, the risk that people start seeing the judiciary as politically motivated. And they draw a parallel to the FBI and how public trust in the FBI has eroded.
Yeah, that's a really sharp observation. The argument is that the FBI's reputation has taken a hit because people see it as politically biased, especially after the Russia investigation and all the controversy around Hillary Clinton's emails. And the worry is that the same thing could happen to the courts. If judges are constantly seen as just being against the president's agenda, no matter what the legal arguments are, people might lose faith in the whole system. And that perception, whether it's accurate or not, can really undermine the legitimacy of the courts.
And we saw that play out, didn't we? The source talks about all the scrutiny and the attacks on the judge who issued that deportation injunction, people going after their background, trying to link them to the Democrats, the Russia investigation. It just feeds right into that narrative of political bias.
It does. And it shows just how carefully the judiciary has to tread. They have to be this independent check on the executive branch, which is so vital, but they also have to protect their own impartiality and make sure the public still trusts them. If every decision is seen as a partisan move, then the whole idea of the rule of law starts to crumble.
The source also makes a really important point about due process in immigration cases. They say that even with those legal safeguards in place, the bar for deportation might actually be pretty low. So the implication there seems to be that the executive branch could achieve its goals without having to ignore legal procedures or court orders. It's almost like the disagreement is more about the methods than the actual goals themselves.
Exactly. That's a really important nuance. It suggests that the conflict might not always be about the ultimate policy goal, but about how you get there. Do you follow the rules? Do you respect legal principles? And this brings us to a really big question. How can the judiciary do its job of keeping things in check without being seen as just another political player in the game? How do they protect both the law and their own authority? It's a tough one.
It really is. So we've covered a lot of complex ground today, haven't we? We talked about all the tangled issues around disclosing information in this hyper-connected world. Where do you draw the line between what's newsworthy, what's a matter of national security, and what's ethically responsible? It's not always clear-cut.
Not at all.
And then we look at this growing tension between the president's power and the court's ability to review his actions. And we talked about how all of this could affect public trust in our institutions, which is a pretty big deal.
It is. Understanding all these complexities, seeing the different sides of the arguments, and really grappling with what the long-term consequences might be. That's crucial for anyone who's trying to make sense of what's going on in the world right now, both politically and socially.
And it brings us to something we want you to think about after this deep dive is over. Given how fast information travels now and how divided our political discussions have become, how do we make sure that both national security and the integrity of our institutions stay strong? What role do we, as citizens who are paying attention, play in finding that balance? That's a question that's worth thinking about long after this conversation ends.
Definitely. Keep exploring these issues, keep looking for different perspectives, and keep digging deeper into the forces that shape our world.
We'll see you next time.
Bye for now.